You don't have to be afraid of any shark when you're with me. The way you swim and the way you move, you'd be a natural.
A natural? Who, me? No way. You're not playing with a full deck.
Look, I'm not crazy if that's what you mean. Sharks are a very misunderstood creature. They are predators, but so are we. I mean, we kill cattle and chickens to survive, don't we? Hmm?
But not that way. Alive.
You've never been in a slaughterhouse. You've never heard the cries, smelt the blood.
This old world may never change the way it's been. An awareness of environmental degradation grew in the mid-20th century. With the damning evidence of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, the conservation movement began to gain momentum in the United States. What was once the cause of social welfare organizations like the Sierra Club became the mission of government, through the Environmental Protection Agency and the invocation of policies and acts that aimed to protect the American wilderness. If humanity was incapable of leaving only footprints, then the purpose of these acts was to soften those footfalls in order to preserve the beautiful and strange creatures of the earth, and in doing so, to expand the quality of life for humanity and to luxuriate in the compassion and reason of humankind. An American culture of roadside gator wrestling and sport hunting was not immune from this culture shift. What had been a brutish and cruel way of life for many came to be recognized and condemned as such by an evolving society. The cause of animal welfare and the cause of environmental protection became inextricable, for there was an immense callousness in the human impact on beasts and badlands. That callousness demanded to be legislated out of human behavior, lest nature avenge itself by other means. In the exploitation films of Willard and Grefé, his Florida setting guides theme. The beautiful and threatening biome of Key West is subject to the meddling of science and witchcraft, and bears witness to the smolder and ruin of his heroes. His films are a natural evolution of that roadside stop. In Sting of Death, The Death Curse of Tartu, and Stanley, Grefé's focus on amphibian and marine curiosities closes the distance between a naturalist's appreciation and a carnival barker's golden goose. As exploitation films, they tapped into a broader sense in the marketplace that films built around exotic, fantastical encounters with nature would draw in audiences. Stanley bears special mention here. It's about a Seminole war veteran who uses his pet snake to avenge himself on society. It was made in a clear homage to Willard, a film in which a misfit commands a rat colony to kill his enemies, which only a year earlier had been a financial success and a cultural phenomenon. Grefé's model, like that of many exploitation film producers, was to identify trends in cinema and to imitate them, to create variations on stories that had been proven marketable. With the release and massive success of Jaws in 1975, Grefé's history with filming trained animals was soon put to use with his own version of Jaws, Mako, The Jaws of Death. While Jaws cast the shark as a pure predatory force of violence and reserves its compassion for the shark's hunters and its prey, Grefé drew again from the premise of Willard, using the shark as a vehicle to explore the possibility of a bond between incompatible subjectivities, human reason, and animal instinct. Further to the contrary of Jaws, Here, sharks are admired for their beauty. Even their life cycle becomes part of the plot of the film, as protagonist Sonny Stein acts as a kind of midwife for the sharks in his care. Stein's connection to the sharks is supernatural. It's tied to a medallion that he wears that protects him from their hunger and allows him to swim with them and to bond with them.
So in return for my life, as long as I wear my medallion, I'll find friends everywhere amongst the sharks. So I've tried to pay back a debt that I really can't pay.
But it didn't have to be supernatural. His character anticipates the controversial, ill-fated, real-life grizzly bear conservationist Timothy Treadwell, obsessive devotee to the cause of grizzly bears, who lived among them in Alaska before he was, somewhat inevitably, killed by one. Like Treadwell, Stein has forged a deeper connection with his sharks than he has with people, and he sees no boundary between himself and his sharks. Where Willard commanded rats to avenge himself and his father, Sonny himself avenges the sharks, as in the opening sequence in which he massacres a boat of shark fishermen, a strange intruder out here on the ocean, more shark than a man. In Mako, the Jaws of Death, for the most part, only people do the killing. In this sense, Grefé's film is a work of moral, ecological despair, a denunciation of the social contract of nature, eat or be eaten. In this, it's an absurd satire of the wildlife fantasies of the era. Sonny Stein's inability to communicate with the human world is repeatedly justified in his encounters with corrupt archetypes: the club promoter, the showgirl, the scientist, all of them gleefully and maliciously exploiting his sharks to their own ends.
What's going on?
Just a little something we cooked up. East Control set off a high-frequency sound in that tank. Drives those sharks bananas.
Key West is a hell of animal abuse and exploitation, a gathering spot for tourists with exotic tastes and local fishermen and hunters who live in a fog of cruel joy. Richard Jaeckel plays Stein with an aloof sensitivity, and the film briefly presents itself as a love story in his preoccupation with the showgirl Karen, who performs aquatic dances in a tank in her husband's dive bar. His attention to Karen leads him to rescue her from a pair of rapists, her club owner husband's best customers. Stein takes her back to his stilt house, where he shows her his special bond with the tame sharks in his care, presenting her with the supernatural origins of his medallion. He gives her an account of his salvation in the Philippines, where, working as a salvager, he found himself pursued by mercenaries. He's saved thanks to the intervention of sharks, and this stirs his devotion to the conservation of sharks. It's an inverse of the scene in Jaws, in which fisherman Quint tells his story of sharks massacring men in the waters around the sunken USS Indianapolis. Quint's story is used to explain the cruelty of nature to man, while Stein has experienced the opposite. Rescued from human violence by sharks, he desires to become their savior in turn. This rare act of bonding is meaningful to Stein. Karen seems taken with Stein, but really, she's just taking him in. She convinces him to allow one of his sharks to join her act, leading to its sonic abuse at the hands of her husband Barney. Neither the showgirl nor the club owner have a conscience about their abuse of the shark, or their manipulation of Stein. To them, he's just a freak, and it's just an animal. The world of aquatic research offers no better options for Stein, a scientist who arranges for the captive birth of a pregnant shark in Stein's care, slaughters it and its pups for the sake of research. This is the final straw that provokes Stein to go on a murderous rampage. The antipathy between Sonny Stein and the society around him is palpable. His final repudiation of the cruelty of man comes in the final act. Having engineered Karen's death by shark in front of a raucous crowd at Barney's, Stein is recognized and pursued by an angry mob and the police. Cornered in his stilt house, he removes his medallion and feeds himself to his sharks. This act of suicide by shark reinforces the mystical fantasy of the medallion. In doing so, it forfeits the possibility that Stein was not the recipient of Filipino hoodoo, that he might instead have been a lonely man empowered by the suggestion of magic to transgress the line between human and animal. This doesn't diminish his nobility. Sonny Stein would rather be chum for his sharks than a trophy for humans. It's also a stark contrast to other animal exploitation films like Willard and Stanley, in which the anti-heroes are betrayed by the wild nature of their kept beasts and suffer ironic ends. Again, the conservationist perspective of Mako grants it complexity. Stein is an outsider, but he is a selfless outsider in a world of greed. Grefé's film bears an essential marker of conscience-driven exploitation films. Its marketing takes advantage of the lurid draw of its own daring production. Posters announced that it was filmed without the benefit of cages, mechanical sharks, or other protective devices. As a point of pride, it holds a lurid contradiction to the film itself, which regards Stein with compassion and endorses his worldview.
Captured with some of the most daring underwater photography ever brought to the motion picture screen. Stark, chilling realism that plunges you into a twilight world of thrashing danger. Filmed without the benefit of cages, mechanical sharks, or other protective devices.
This marketing reinforces the threat of the wild and implies that the film imperiled its crew, which is plain to see from the underwater footage in which stunt performers interact with real sharks in ways that might cause one to wince with tension. The claims of the film underscore the difference between the low budget of Mako and the comparatively massive budget of Jaws, with its famously malfunctioning mechanical shark. But they also suggest something contradictory, that Mako, the Jaws of Death, is sold by the realism of its production, even as it presents a mystical fantasy. In the mid-1960s, the folk singer Fred Neil became fascinated with dolphins. It was the era of conservation, a growing awareness of the finitude of the Garden of Earth, a desire to tend to that garden so that rampant human selfishness, the consequences of environmental degradation, or even the course of Darwinian fitness wouldn't erase the world as it was. It was in this same spirit that primatologists evolved from merely studying chimps to adopting and humanizing chimps, and attempting to teach them to communicate, an impulse that reaches an ugly plateau in Dian Fossey's tragic project, where the worth and suffering of mountain gorillas were weighed against the worth and suffering of the Africans who lived around them. The dolphin was, of all aquatic life, one for which the cause of human support could readily be made, for their acute and proven intelligence. And one finds again two sides of a coin. Fred Neil, drawn to the dolphins as a symbol of a beautiful, natural world. And in the same era, Mike Nichols' absurd thriller, The Day of the Dolphin, in which that same intelligence that ennobled the dolphin is exploited for political assassination. Fred Neil came to a point in his life where he was no longer interested in making music. He abandoned it and gradually retreated from public life while assisting with the Dolphin Research Project. He wrote a song about dolphins, this song, in which he asks the only question that truly matters when it comes to interspecies communication. Do you ever think of me? One imagines fictional Sonny Stein, real Timothy Treadwell, fictional Willard, real Dian Fossey, in their darkest hours, asking themselves, do they ever think of me? Fred Neil, though he was born in Ohio and made his career in New York, settled in the Florida Keys long after his departure from public life. What was it that drew Fred Neil to Florida? It kept him close to the Dolphin Research Center, which he had spent decades supporting. But it could also have been the same thing that kept William Grefé there, having a front seat to the wild and unpredictable nature of man under the sun. Maybe it was the weather.
This old world may never change.